So we have been running in a series up to Easter in Luke's Gospel. I'm taking a sidestep this morning. As I was pondering what to speak on, my thoughts rattled round and I ended up returning to a passage I've preached on about 4 years ago, I think. And I just will hear words in this that will become familiar in the next couple of weeks. So they're words of prayer that Jesus says, and in the next few Sundays we'll see them in their context in Luke's Gospel. But I wanted to spend some time looking at Psalm 31 this morning. So if you've got your Bibles with you, open them up to Psalm 31. I'm afraid there won't be any words on the screen, so if you haven't got a Bible with you, scramble around under the chairs and there should be a pew Bible somewhere. So Psalm 31, it's a psalm written, a psalm of David, and written as a song, because it says to the choir master at the beginning. Get me, I can spot the clues in the text. But it's a psalm written, the title I've given this morning is Our Time is in His Hands. Our time is in His hands. And just as we read this psalm, there's 4 clear phases, if you like, 4 clear strands to it as we go through, and sections. And we're going to explore each one, and we're going to see, I don't know, hands up. I didn't see the original series, but hands up if you're familiar with the TV series Quantum Leap. Anybody? I knew Bryce. Do you know what? I knew as soon as I thought of Quantum Leap, I thought Bryce will know what I'm talking about. Quantum Leap I saw the repeat. It was brilliant. I loved that program. Just kind of, he'd time traveling and got stuck in time traveling loop, and he had to solve a problem before he could move on to the next leap in time. And so sometimes he'd arrive in time as a famous character, and sometimes he'd arrive as just a minor person in the story, but each time there was something to be solved. And as we go through this psalm, I want you to be on the lookout for the quantum leaps where Jesus pops up in the psalm. I don't know if you know this, but when you read the Psalms in the Old Testament, there's kind of 3 layers to the Psalms. So the first layer that we see straight away is David or the sons of Korah or whoever's writing this psalm. It's their experience. They are writing it from what they see, what they have felt, what they know. So there is their perspective. Then as we read it quite often, like we come to Psalms of Lament, and we see that we can be honest about our suffering. We can be honest about the hard times, because the psalmists were, and so we should be honest and not put on a false joy, but we should be honest about what we're going through. So there's our perspective as we read it, but then there's another layer in which there is a messianic prophetic edge to many of the Psalms. You read the Psalms and you suddenly realize that there's David's experience, there's my experience, but then beyond that, there's Jesus' experience and what he did to fulfill the promises and the words of the Psalms. And so this is one of those Psalms. We see things in it that we go, a glimpse of Jesus. And so we're going to spend some time going through and looking at those things. When I was a schoolboy, I went to stay with my uncle and aunt up in Nantwich. I don't know if you know that area, but there's a brilliant thing. I think I've alluded to it before. There's a brilliant thing up there. The government, during the Cold War, they built this vast underground concrete bunker so that if the worst were to happen and the bomb were to drop, they could move some politicians generally. No, I'm not going to make that comment. Don't do it, Phil. Don't do it. I'm praying for them. I'm not going to mock them. They put politicians and other people who they deemed necessary for society to function in this bunker, and they'd lock the doors and they'd be protected. Now what I love is going up there now as a boy, there's these great big heritage signs with secret nuclear bunker pointing on it. You're like, it's not quite so secret, is it, guys? I hope those weren't up during the Cold War, because that's kind of blown straight away. But it's fascinating. I went down there. If you get a chance, I'd recommend it. It's been turned, I presume it's still open, but it was being turned into kind of a bit of a visitor centre where they've got mannequins stood pointing at boards and kind of holding phones and things. It's an amazing glimpse into history and going, wow, what a time to have lived through. So this secret bunker, why have I told you about that? Well, David starts this psalm. He says, "In you, O Lord, do I take refuge." And there's 2 words he uses for refuge in this psalm. The first one is hasa. That is to flee for protection or to find hope in, or to confide in. So his first thought is, it's to God that I run to for hope, to confide in. When I'm in trouble, that's where I head. And the first question I want to pose to us as we start out, and we're going to go straight off the bat with a hard one, is who do we confide in? Who do we run to in times of trouble? Because there can be many options, but the psalmist is saying that no, his default, his go-to, his straightaway option is, I go to God as my refuge. You know, when you're in trouble, do you pick up the phone and speak to your, in my case, probably mum or dad, and say, hey, guys, mum's brilliant, though. I'll pick up the phone, I'll say, Mum, I've got this problem, really struggling. And straight away she'll go, have you prayed about it? But absolutely, I'm learning. But who do we go to? Who would that phone call be for you? You know, would it be a relative, your best mate, your husband, your wife, your partner? Who would you pick up the phone to? Because the psalmist straight away, off the bat, says it's God that we should head to. When hard times roll in, we should roll to our knees and pray and confide and seek refuge in him. And so we continue down, and he says, let me never be put to shame. That's the picture of publicly being shown to have trusted in a false hope. Let me never be put to shame, the psalmist says. Don't let me ever be found to have put my hope in something that is not real. There's lots of places that in this world that you can put your trust, and people are finding that, aren't they? You may have found that in your own life, but people are finding it in this world, that there are places where we can go to. We can think that this is where safety lies. And time reveals that it is not secure, it is not safe. We were talking during the holiday club, and we were talking about various empires, and we were talking about... Can I use bad language from the platform? We were talking about Brexit. And we were talking about the whole situation, and we were saying how actually when you look through history, you know, there was the Roman Empire, there was the Greek Empire, there've been so many Babylonian Empire, there's so many great empires that have been man-made, and people have said, look, here it is! And time has rolled round, and the empire has fallen, and the one sovereign dominion remains, God, enthroned in the heavens. I love the picture in verse 2, and it's a picture that strikes home and I think is pertinent at this point in time for some of us. Verse 2, he says, incline your ear to me. Incline your ear to me. That's the picture of somebody who's lying sick, potentially dying, with a weak voice, not sure, wanting to cry out, and he's saying, God, would you incline your ear to me? Lean close to hear my call, to hear my cry. Rescue me speedily. And then he says, be a rock of refuge. That's the second word. It's maos, which is a fortified place of defense. So he says, I'm going to put my hope in you. Why? Because you are a fortified place of defense. He says that, you know, when you put things in a safe place, you know, there's the Rock in America, isn't it? Alcatraz. If you wanted to put people in a place that was impenetrable, it was there. And there's other places that we put things that are safe. Interesting, one of these nuclear bunkers has been turned into, I don't know if you're aware of this, the gardeners amongst us, there's a place that is being used to store seeds, so that in the event of any catastrophe, these seeds are secure and safe underground and kept in perfect conditions, so that if all life were wiped out, the first thing you can do, Robert, is step out into the nuclear holocaust landscape and plant a bean. And we're off to go again. Hey? But the psalmist is saying, no, this morning, you can put your hope, you can put your confidence, you can put your trust in the one who is an unshakable refuge. Unshakable, unchanged, certain through all things. And he says in verse 3, and for your name's sake you lead me. You see, salvation isn't just a byproduct of God's character. Salvation, his name hinges on it. His name is revealed as the God who saves, the God who rescues, the God who comes to the aid of his people. And the psalmist is saying, your name, your name's sake is why you will save. You lead me and you guide me, he says. And then we come, verse 5, for those of you who've been reading ahead. I was always that kid in school, reading ahead, answering the next question before we got there, so I understand. But in verse 5, do you see it there? He says in verse 5, into your hands I commit my spirit. I'm looking for the light bulbs. There's a few. Yeah, there's a few light bulbs. Ping, 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 ping. Yep, yep. Where have we heard those words? Where will we hear those words in the coming weeks? It's Jesus on the cross. The words that Jesus utters from the cross. That's why we're spending this time in Luke building up to Easter, is because Jesus' words from the cross, can you imagine? He's not being just mindless in what he says, but he's quoting what he knows. And so Jesus quotes this Psalms verse when he's hung out on the cross, dying. He cries out to God and he says, into your hands I commit my spirit. That's staggering. Staggering. And actually, I did some reading as I was preparing this, and when you read throughout history, the Christian martyrs, those who have died for their faith, the number of them that at the point of death, their final utterance is, into your hands I commit my spirit. Those that were burnt at the stake, Jan Hus, who was burnt at the stake, cried out, into your hands I commit my spirit. I think it was some of the Tolpodal martyrs that said, into your hands I commit. You go back through the history books and read about the martyrs, and all of them follow this pattern. Luther makes the point that it's not, we don't die for Jesus, we don't die in Jesus, but when we die in this way, we die with Jesus. I love that image. That when we suffer to the point of death, Paul writes in the New Testament, doesn't he, the Apostle Paul, he says, I have suffered not yet to the point of death. But if we suffer to the point of death, if we reach the point where we are killed for Jesus, then we die with him. And we can cry out the words of this psalm, into your hands I commit my spirit. I love the pictures that crop up in the Bible over and over again. And one of my favourite verses in the whole entire Bible is from the book before Psalms, from Job. And Job, if you've not read Job, Job is going through the mill. Job is suffering. Job has had all of his children killed in an accident. Job has had all of his livestock destroyed. Job is sat on the ground with sores and pustules on his body that his wife, bless her, says to him, just go and die. What an encouraging, godly woman she was. But Job is there in all of this suffering, and yet in the midst of it, in Job 19, verse 25, one of my favourite verses in all the Bible, he says, and yet, in the face of this, I know that my Redeemer lives and will one day walk upon the earth. In the midst of all of this inordinate suffering, Job is holding on saying, my Redeemer lives and will one day walk upon the earth. And as we sung, that walk would journey towards Jerusalem and to a cross. Wow. It's good news. It's good news because we don't have a distant deity who's unable to sympathize with our suffering and our weakness. But we have one who has tasted suffering. On our behalf, he suffered and died. And we come to him as faithful. So that is the review of the past. The psalmist has looked back saying, this is true. You have been a refuge in the past. What was true in the light remains true in the dark. And so I'm trusting that you will be a refuge in this moment. Then we come to verse 9, and he starts reflecting on the present experience, a godless reality. He said he's reviewed the past. Now this is his godless reality. It's like, have you ever been to see a 3D film? Yeah, you've been to 3D films? And when you've finished and you take those glasses off, is it me or does it really kind of, oh, that's not pleasant? And there's just this odd feeling. And it's like that for the psalmist. He takes off his gospel glasses. He takes off this perception, this reality that God is a refuge, and he looks around at the world and he says, "Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, my soul and my body also, for my life is spent with sorrow and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity and my bones waste away." He says, "I look at the world without you and it is just bleak." He said, "If there is no God, if you're not there for me, then this life sucks to the nth degree. It's horrendous," he says. He says he's exhausted. You read that description, "I'm spent with sorrow, my years with sighing." He's exhausted on life. And then he says in verse 10, towards the end of verse 10, he says, "My strength fails because of my iniquity." He says, even if I manage to muster up enough strength to push on, it feels like I can carry on. It feels like I've got a second wind. And then his sins, his iniquity confronts him and he realizes, oh, I can't. It's a body blow to him. How does this happen? It's that internal dialogue that you're all familiar with. You know that conversation you have with yourself where you say, "I should do this thing for God." Yeah, but you can't do that because, that thought that you had yesterday about that person, that was unloving and ungracious, and so you shouldn't act in this way because you're not good enough. Or it's, "I've got a word and I should bring something to the assembled saints because God has placed something in my heart." And a thought crops in that says, but what about what you said about that person? What about what you did 10 years ago? What about what you are as a human being? It's that internal dialogue that just at the point when you think you can go, wham, the accuser comes in and says, but. I can see from faces that some of you are familiar with that. And some of you who maybe don't know Jesus are familiar with it as well, that you think there's good things that you should do, but each time you set out with good intention, there's just that feeling of, but at my core I'm rotten. Is sin sapping your strength? Gossip, unforgiveness, lying, immorality, so many things that can come along, and the enemy uses them to pull the plug on your power supply. He uses them to go, not today. What do we do? What do we do? You take it to the cross. You take it to the cross. You come to that place that we sang about where we said, thank you for the cross. If you're here and you're not a Christian and you think, what is wrong with you people? You're singing thank you for a Roman execution. Yeah. Oh yeah. All day long. All day long. Why? Because it's the cross that tells me that Jesus paid the price that I owe. He died in my place, taking the punishment that's mine, so that I can plug into the power that is his and I can live for him. I know that my good intentions can be tainted, but Jesus says, keep going, keep driving on. He is my refuge, he is my strength, he is my shield, and so I'm going to live for him. All right, then maybe it's just me that's going to do that, but hey, that's fine. Then we come to three elements that are, there's expected, surprising, and a shock. Three people that the psalmist encounters. He says, firstly, because of my adversaries, my enemies, I have become a reproach. Hey, that's not surprising, is it? We've all got people who don't like us. Yep. We've all got people who don't like us. Even Stu. Sorry, Stu. I'm not one of them, brother. I'm not one of them. But we've all got people who don't like us. And if they say mean things against us, we're not surprised. That's kind of par for the course. But he says, my acquaintances, people that I nod at in the street, people that I know, they walk to the other side of the road. He says, I've become an object of dread. They walk towards me, they see me coming, and they go, uh-oh, don't make eye contact, don't make eye contact. We'll have to talk to him, we'll have to talk to him. No, don't. He says, people who just know me are just acquaintances. He says they avoid me because they don't know what to say. And he says, and those who see me in the street flee from me. He says his neighbours, he's become an object of dread, acquaintances flee from him in the street. There's this, not surprising, oh, his neighbours don't want to know him. Or even his friends try and avoid him. Even the people he knows try and avoid him. You see, Jesus came to that place. Jesus came to that place. He became an object of wrath. In Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah says that he became an object of wrath. We considered him smitten by God, struck by him, and afflicted. We counted him forsaken, Isaiah says. And the psalmist says, I become like a broken vessel, and they plot and they scheme against me. Wow. I don't know if you've been following, we were discussing in the prayer meeting, have you been following, maybe because of my interests I follow it, the ongoing saga of Israel Folau and Billy Vinipola and others, the rugby players who have posted things, probably not in the wisest vein, it must be said, but posted things on social media, and now they are being hounded by the media. There are people literally plotting how they destroy their careers for what they have said. They are plotting against them. And this is the godless reality that we live in. That when we speak what God has said in the Bible, we are subject to then accusations of hate speech, of intolerance, of hurtful attitudes. And actually, Israel and Billy both said that Jesus accepts, only acceptance is found in Jesus. When you read it, they said that there are these categories. Billy Vinipola, bless him, said, I've been one of those on the list. I've done all of those things, he said. At one time in my life, I've been all of those things, but God accepts me in Jesus. And it's been fascinating to just see our tolerant, liberal, loving society plot the downfall of these men and say they should be punished for all time and eternity for what they have said. An interesting observation on a godless reality. But the psalmist in the next section, he puts his 3D glasses back on, puts his gospel lens back in place, and he says that there is a present hope. It's interesting, Israel Folau, I saw an interview, well no it wasn't, it was an ambush the other day by a media person who came along and just said to him, your career is over, was it worth it? I think the psalmist has got an answer for that. This woman came up to him and said, your career is over. Is it? Really? Oh, thanks for letting me know. But he said, the psalmist says, but I, that word but. There are great old preachers that I used to listen to who used to say, but. There's a but in the text. It says, but. Everything would be bleak and despondency. But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Rescue me from the hand of my enemies and from my persecutors. Make your face to shine on your servant. Save me in your steadfast love. Do you spot all the covenant language that the psalmist uses there? He says, you are my God. He says, I'm identifying as one of your people. I'm on your side. You have set your love on me, he says. My times are in your hands. Make your face to shine on your servant. These are all Old Testament covenant language that God used to say, I make my face to shine on you. You are my people. I've set my affection on you. The one I love is that he says, and if you've spent any time around me, you'll know that when it says steadfast love, I love that phrase. That's translated as the word hesed. Hesed, which is God's covenant-keeping, always and forever, never giving up love. That's what he set on you this morning. If you know Jesus, if you've accepted that he died in your place, then God has set his hesed love on you. He's never giving up on you. He's never going to abandon you because he set his affection on you. That's great news this morning. That's why we can go to a hurting, dying, broken world that is tearing each other apart, saying we should be tolerant but not of that. And we say Jesus died for you and accepts you and makes you one of his own so that you can be in his covenant people. Jesus has been here. The quantum leap has appeared again. The covenant has been kept. You see, the problem is, we look at the Old Testament, and the covenant was drafted, and God says, you do this, and I'll do this. You do this, and I'll do this. You behave this way, and I will be your God. And do you know what? They stuffed up. Do you know what? I stuffed up. Do you know what? You stuffed up. Come and have a word with me afterwards if you think you haven't. We'll discuss it. But you have stuffed up. You have not kept the covenant. You have not lived as God called you to. And yet, Jesus steps into time and space and he keeps the covenant. He lives the life I should live. I get the promises that are his. Jesus has done it all. And so he says, oh Lord, let me not be put to shame. Why? Because Jesus was put to shame. Jesus tasted shame so that I will know that I am secure and will never be put to open public shame. Have you spotted I'm a little bit excited about the gospel this morning? God is good, far greater than you ever imagined. And then we shift in the final one. He's talked about his present hope. He says, in the middle of all of this junk and mess that we call life, this is what I'm trusting in. It's Jesus. And then he shifts into the future expectation in verse 19. Verse 19, he says, oh, how abundant is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you, and worked for those who take refuge in you. Spot the shift. Again, primary school teacher kicking in, just to warn you. Spot the shift in the verbs. Who does it? Who does it in this section? Previously, it has been, I take my refuge in you. I come to you. You are my God. From verse 19, he says, you have stored this up. You have worked for those who take refuge in you. He says, you store them in your shelter. Blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love. Not just shown. Do you notice that? Only God does that, doesn't he? God doesn't just show his love. He wondrously shows his steadfast love. It's interesting because it's like talking, if you have the confusing experience of trying to talk to my daughter. I know, I'm sorry. We're working on it. She is only 2, forgive her. But if you try and talk to Alice, if you say, what have you done? Increasingly, she's, learning words and increasing vocabulary. She'll say, puck. And my nephew's a little bit older, and if you talk to my nephew, you'll say, what have you done today? He said, I went to town. Okay, where did you go in town? Went to shops. Okay. Where did, and you sort of continue, and it's always I, isn't it, with the little children? I did this, I did that. And actually, we all know that my 3-year-old nephew is not capable of driving to town. He's a farmer's child, so, give him a couple of years and he can take the tractor. But he's not capable of getting to town under his own steam. And yet he talks like he has. I went to town, I did this, I did that. And the psalmist shifts here and he recognizes, I don't do anything, it's all of you. It's all of you, God. You accomplish it all. You do it. So, there's the future expectation. He says, in verse 21, he says, blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love to me when I was in a besieged city and had said in my alarm, I am cut off from your sight. Hold on. Somebody else says that. Just a couple of weeks' time, somebody else will say, my God, why have you forsaken me? I am cut off from your sight. but you heard the voice of my pleas for mercy. When I cried to you for help, love the Lord, all you his saints. That's an instruction to you, by the way. It's an instruction to you this morning. Love the Lord, all you his saints. The Lord preserves the faithful, but abundantly repays the one who acts in pride. Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord. Wow. I love this psalm. I love this psalm because it reminds me, last night, Bex was playing in her wind orchestra in Nailsworth. And they played the song, What a Wonderful World. Do you know the song? And instantly, every time I hear it, I'm taken to the film Good Morning Vietnam. Seen that film? Where Robin Williams, the radio DJ at the base camp in Vietnam, plays that song. And what you see and what you hear do not correlate. Because you have the images of warfare, of napalm attacks, of bombs, of guns, of soldiers, of all that is horrid and abhorrent in this broken world. And then you have the song singing in the background, what a wonderful world. I see trees of green, red roses too. And he says, I see people walking by and they say, how do you do? They mean, I love you. And you've just got this counterpoint. You're kind of going, but that and that, they don't make sense. In this psalm, the psalmist brings those two juxtaposed counterpoints. He says, this world is broken. And some of you can bear witness to that from recent experience and from experience from previously in life. You can say, yes, this world is broken. But he says, but God reveals in his Son what a wonderful God and world that we are in. And one day, as we prayed earlier, one day he's coming back. And he's going to restore everything to as it should be. And we will be able to sing with truth and experience what a wonderful world that he has revealed. So my final challenge this morning is, where is your confidence this morning? Where is your confidence? Our time is in his hands. Do you know the really staggering thing is? If you choose to believe that, as the psalmist does, and act out of that, then you find that it is true and reliable, and God is on your side, and your defender, and your refuge, and your keeper. But if you don't choose to find it, then actually you find your time is in his hands. You can choose to turn a blind eye and pretend like it's not real, but it is. God has created us all. The Bible says he created us for the purpose of knowing and living for him. And so this morning is your opportunity to respond to that. If you have heard what I have said and you know that your confidence is not in Jesus this morning, then now's an opportunity to put your confidence in the right place. To come to Jesus and say, hey, I recognize that your death, your resurrection, your shed blood, all of it was for me so that I could know you and live for you. We're going to have some time just singing our final songs now. Our final song, You Chose the Cross, Lost in Wonder. As we're singing it, I want you to just ponder these things. Is your confidence in Jesus this morning? If it is, come to him, give thanks, praise to him, and recognize that he chose the cross for you. When he was forsaken, when he said, I have been cut off, it was for you. And if you don't know that that's true, then I'd encourage you to come and speak. Come and speak to me at the end. Come and talk to me. I want to talk to you about why this is so important, why this matters so much. And we'd love to share time with you and share why Jesus means so much, if you haven't picked up already.